Hi, Kirsten. Thank you so much for being here today and talking with me. I know my students will really appreciate getting to hear from you. Um, so it's good to see you. I was hoping maybe you could start by telling me a little bit about your journey in higher education, where you went to school, and maybe what areas you've worked in over the years. And then particularly, I'm curious to hear how you determined fit for the positions that you've served in.
Okay, that's a lot all in one question, but here we go. So I think the first thing to know is that my father worked in higher education and student affairs. And so I always had some inkling about what student affairs was, although not fully. I attended a small Division II school in Texas called Stephen F. Austin, where I had a softball scholarship. I left after my junior year and transferred to Bloomsburg University in Pennsylvania to finish out my last year of eligibility. So when it came time for that fifth year, I ended up getting my MBA and had an assistantship in residence life. So that's how I started in that. Um, but I was shy and not very confident and scared to death to interview. So when they offered me a clerk typist one job for $7.36 an hour, it was a lot more than I was making as a grad student, and I didn't have to really interview, so I took it. And in retrospect, that was a very bad career decision because there I was with an MBA as a clerk typist one. And to be fair, I worked up to clerk typist two and eventually management technician one at Bloomsburg, but still really felt undervalued. Personally, it was a good decision. I met my husband, we had our daughter, Kate. So I don't regret that really, except maybe I should have left a little bit sooner. The pivot point for me, because I think careers also often have pivot points. And one of those was when I went to ask my boss why I couldn't get promoted to a professional position. She told me that my husband had a good job in town and there was no reason for me to promote me because we would never leave. And so I went home to my husband and said, would he be willing to move for my job? And he's like, yeah, where do you want to go? So when I was at Bloomsburg, I had responsibility and really did most of the work for assignments, budgets, technology, and marketing. Did a national search, and I was at Bloomsburg for 9 years. I did a national search and ended up landing a job as Associate Director of Business Operations at the University of Missouri. So it was quite a leap, and I am very thankful to the man who hired me there for taking that leap of faith. And he said, I knew you had it in you. He didn't consider it that much of a risk, although I could certainly see that. So where I was doing all those things at Bloomsburg, I now oversaw staffs that did all of that work. So that was also a leap, going from doing most of the work myself and supervising the student staff to having professionals with their own staffs that I was supervising. And that transition seemed to be fairly easy for me. When I was at Bloomsburg, they told me I'd never been an RA, so I would never be successful in housing. I think I showed them wrong that you actually can do that. I was at Missouri for about 11 years, and while I was there, I got my doctorate. I knew that I wanted to become the executive director, director of a housing and residence life program. And after I got my doctorate, I had applied a few places, actually got offered the job at IUP and turned it down for a lot. There were a lot of red flags, put it that way. So I talked to my boss and said, could I have responsibility for facility operations, since that person had left the job about a year prior. And so another pivotal point, my boss said, well, I can't afford to lose you from the business side because you're really good at it. And I said, well, I wasn't thinking instead of, I was thinking in addition to. And he cautioned me because he had gone through a divorce because he had spent so much time at work. And he didn't want to see that happen to my husband and I. And by this time we also had a son. And so I appreciated that note of caution. I didn't heed it, but I appreciated that at least he thought about me that way. So I told him I would stay for 3 years if I could do that, which I did. And that's when I did a national search and I ended up here at the University of South Carolina as executive director of university housing. It had everything that I was looking for, which was an auxiliary operation, because I knew the person who had control of the money had control of a lot of other things, came with some power. I wanted it to be not a bifurcated system. So in housing, that means residence life and the business side are all under one umbrella, because I knew the things I wanted to do educationally would be more easily achieved if it were all in one operation. I wanted something with a strong learning community history. I didn't want to be swimming against the tide, and I wanted it to be east of the Mississippi, so the trip back to my parents' house was less than 16 hours, which is what it was in Missouri. And after about 10 years, the AVP position for student housing and well-being opened up, and I was interested in moving up. And so now I have housing, student health services, including counseling, sustainability, and faculty-led living learning communities. So FIT was, so let me go back to what areas have I worked in over the years. When I was at Bloomsburg, we had housing and residence life. We also had dining with a dining contract, dabbled some. We had responsibility for the child care center and also for their student health services. So I had some exposure to those things, was given a lot of latitude, participated highly in orientation and orientation programs at that point. So that was probably where I got the most exposure to the widest variety of different units within student affairs. Does that get it all, I think?
That's great. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Um, Kirsten, what are the trends and issues that you read about and discuss with staff in your departments or areas?
Ooh, well, I don't know how it is on other people's campuses. Well, actually, I have an inkling, but mental health concerns for our students and even with our staff sometimes. This year alone, last year at this time, we had one suicide attempt. This year, we have over 12 suicide attempts. And so this is becoming more and more of an issue, probably somewhat because it's been destigmatized, but also because people are struggling a little bit more when they come here. So mental health is definitely first and foremost. We're dealing with that most directly in both of my major units in housing and in the health center. Also talking about access. What does it mean to provide access for people who maybe wouldn't be able to afford to come here? And what kinds of things do we provide them to make sure that they are successful once they get here? So it's not just can we get them in the door, it's also how do we ensure that they are successful when they come to our institution. Talking about free speech and viewpoint diversity. Just because we don't like what people have to say doesn't mean that we should be able or can prevent them from saying those things. And how do you respond to a student body to be reassuring that you, as an institution, you don't agree with what was said, but certainly there can't be punishments or initiatives to try to stop people from being able to express what they want to express. And then lastly, diversity, equity, inclusion, and our president tags achievement on there. I'm still trying to figure out why that's important to our president as we dive more deeply into it. But for me, it's really important in creating diversity action plans, not just something that describes what we've done, but what steps are we going to take to try to remove obstacles and systems that are oppressive. So those are the big ones for me.
Great, thank you. What do you love most about the current work that you do, and what is most challenging?
What I love most about the work I do is watching people grow and develop. When I was earlier in my career, that really came through student interaction. As I've progressed up the ladder, I still enjoy watching that happen. My passion area really is in young and mid-level professionals at this point. I'm highly involved in ACUHOI, the housing professional organization, in working and chairing their institutes. So the regional entry level institutes done through our regional ACUHO professional organization, the National Housing Training Institute, and I chaired the Senior Housing Officers Institute. So that teaching piece for me, watching people grow and develop, get new information, assemble it in different ways, and you can see that on the job too, right? It doesn't have to just be in the formal setting when you see hall directors who have the light bulb go on. It it's just the most rewarding part of this job. The part that's most challenging, I think, is dealing with the politics of an institution, which I've seen more of as I've progressed up the ladder. And that sounds like it's negative, but not necessarily. So it means that you're learning more about what other people do, what's important to them, how can you collaborate, how can you, there may be somebody that you have a philosophical alignment with that you weren't aware of before, and that can provide opportunities for collaboration that you hadn't seen before. So it's all of those. And And on the other side of that, who's territorial about their stuff? Whose toes don't you want to step on? Or how can you do that in a less hurtful kind of way?
Thank you. That's great. Why should assessment be important to student affairs professionals? And how have you sought to create a culture of assessment in the areas you oversee?
Shameless plug for my
Yeah,
book.
that's great.
Um, so I mentioned that my father was in student affairs. In fact, I don't know if you have them reading anything that he wrote, but he and John Gardner were the first student affairs people to talk about the first year experience back in the day, the freshman year experience, and also on assessment and student affairs. That he wrote one of the first books with John Chu. So clearly, it's important to me because just living with my dad and interacting with him, I knew that it was important. And the reason that it is because you can't just have a warm, fuzzy feeling and call something successful. You've got to be able to demonstrate that you had some sort of impact, and not just that you, as the presenter, got a warm, fuzzy feeling. How is that really playing out? So, in order for you to show progression and getting better, you've got to have some kind of baseline assessment, and then you can determine whether your intervention, maybe that's a program, an individual program, or a new, how do I say, not just one program that you deliver, one person giving out information, but maybe an office that you've developed, whether or not that's had an impact. And especially when budgets are declining, you have to be able to show what's your value added. And the way to ask that is, well, what would happen if this office didn't exist? What would students miss out on? And that's sort of the reverse way to ask that. Um, I would also say you don't have to do an assessment after every single one program that you do, because it's really the cumulative effects of the environment in college. And if there's some way to capture that, and that's sort of what the book is about, how do you do that in a less obtrusive way? Because students get survey fatigue, and really, what do you do with that information when you're done? Where does that go? Who gets it? What do you do with it? So how I've tried to create a culture of assessment in the areas that I oversee is there's some questions I ask as someone those areas report to. How do you know that there's a problem? What evidence do you have? What data supports your position? And in the health services side, they do something called evidence-based practice. And so they don't do anything without having some research that would show that this is something that would work. So it's the questions that you ask, but also being able to get the feedback back to the frontline people as quickly as possible so that they can make improvements in what they're doing. The year-end report doesn't help anybody in an organization except to do something the next year. But if you can collect data along the way and get that back to folks, a prime example would be homesickness, right? So if you're meeting with students, because that's another part of the assessment that we do. But if you're meeting with students and you're finding out that a lot of people are feeling homesick, and then you can have a homesickness program to help people meet and connect with other people. If you don't find that out until April, you kind of you've missed your opportunity to help students get connected, and perhaps have impacted retention negatively. So the quicker you can get the information back for improvement, the better off everybody is.
That's great. Thank you so much. Who is a leader that you really admire, and what do you appreciate most about this person?
We'll definitely get this back to my boss, because he's the one that I admire the most. His name is Dennis Pruitt. He's been a vice president of student affairs for over 35 years, which I think in and of itself is amazing. There aren't too many people who have that kind of longevity and that high of a position. But there are several things I admire about him. One is he has high level of care and concern for the people in his organization, and that goes a long way. Whenever I've had a family issue and needed to take off work, he's like, yep, and take as much time as you need, and that's reassuring. Um, what I really appreciate about him is he's read everything, right? We get articles sent to us all the time, and I'm like, geez, that's my area of expertise. How do you find that before me? But he reads vastly outside of the profession. So he's reading things like Harvard Business Review and the Hechinger Report and Change Magazine and The Futurist. And because he does that, he is almost always ahead of the curve on what the next trending issue is that we may be dealing with. And I appreciate not only that, because I don't first of all, I don't know that I have as much time to read as he does. He's a vociferous reader, but his ability to pull these things from different disciplines and different sources into something coherent for student affairs, I think makes him invaluable to the president and invaluable to us. He calls it boundary spanning as part of his dissertation. And so I really tried to take that to heart, but deciding what to read outside of the profession is a little bit tricky. So I find him just an incredible leader who's very well read and really cares about his people and cares about students. I think you can ask for much more than that.
That's neat. That's really neat. Um, Kirsten, how do you create work-life balance?
Not sure I'm a good person to ask about that. And let me tell you why. Not because I don't think I have balance, but when I worked in Bloomsburg and I was the clerk typist 1, 2, and whatever, all I wanted was to be considered professional. And I knew that being professional meant you had exempt status and you worked beyond the normal working hours. And because I wanted that so badly, whenever I was asked to work above and beyond, I took that as a sign that maybe I was could be considered professional in my field. And so whenever that need arises, it feels good. I don't know how else to explain it. Let me digress for a minute. My daughter works in student affairs, and in her first job she worked 41 days straight. That's not work-life balance, and that's not a reasonable expectation from your employer at all. So it also depends on your circumstance. I didn't have anything where I was required to work like that. I had more of a day job with sometimes I worked later. But I think the thing you need to take away from this is work-life balance doesn't mean like going and getting a massage and it's a one and done. It's an ongoing kind of thing for me. So are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating right? Are you exercising? How are you making sure that those things are a priority in your life so that you can better deal and handle the stress that comes with this job? Because any job in student affairs is stressful, I think, and some more stressful than others. But taking care of those baseline things, I think, is the beginning to work-life balance. For me, I wake up at 4:30 and I'm at the gym by 5, because if I don't get that in that day. So it's those kinds of choices. And you have to understand that not every individual day is going to be perfectly balanced. I can talk about the time we had a mold issue here on campus, and I was here until 8 o'clock at night for about 4 to 6 weeks talking with parents who were basically just chewing on me, that I was not in balance. Likewise, when my son got hit in the face with a hockey stick and I had to go flying out of here at 2 p.m. to go get him stitched up at urgent care and meet another parent there, I wasn't in balance that day either. But I hope that over the course of the months and years that things tend to even out.
That's great. Is your son doing okay? I guess this is probably a while ago, but
Yeah, yeah, he's
okay,
good. And
good.
he thinks the scar looks cool, and I was mortified. His perfect modeling face had been ruined.
That's great. Oh, what advice would you give to a graduate student who's pursuing a career in student affairs, maybe particularly if they're looking to be a dean of students or a vice president role?
Sure. I would say in your first job is to know your job really well and learn how to do it well. And that usually takes at least a year, right? So a year to figure out what's going on, what are the expectations. Our business cycle is roughly 1 year. And then after that point, you can begin to ask for outside what I collateral assignments. So whether that can work at the department or division level, perhaps the university level, but that your professional development at first is just learning how to do the job that you have. Depending on the size of the institution, that may the sort of the expanding responsibilities into other units may happen more naturally. At a smaller school, you may be a residence hall coordinator and assistant director of student activities or something like that. At a larger school, that's more difficult. So um, you could end up on a training committee. You may end up on a food service committee, but you're looking for things that are outside of your department so that you begin to get a taste and understanding of what some of those other units go through. I mean, like I talked about early in my career, I had exposure to food service, health services, child care center, and orientation. not sure if I had started out at a larger school, I would have gotten that quite as quickly. I would also say try to create a good network. For me, that happened through institute work, where I got to work with people from a lot of other schools. That's mostly because I'm introverted, and the idea of going to a networking event at a conference just kind of scares me. So I need to have a reason to work with other people. Creating that network does a couple of things. One, if you have an issue or problem, you've got people outside your institution you can talk to, which can be important, because sometimes there's risk in discussing issues at your institution about things that are happening at your institution. And the second thing is that when it comes time for jobs and you've had some exposure to other folks, they may call you and ask you to apply for a position, or you could call them, hey, I'm ready to move to the next step. Have you heard of anything? I would say, like, right now I'm in the SEC. Those job postings come to the executive directors of housing before they go up on the job board where everybody else can see them. So sometimes we get those positions and can forward them on to people before they even officially hit the internet. So I would say get a wide variety of experience and try to create a network that helps you advance.
That's so interesting. I didn't realize that you would receive maybe a job opportunity before it was actually spread widely. That's really interesting.
Yeah, they send it out and say, if you know of anybody who's interested, and here's the job, and then a day or two later it hits Higher Ed Jobs or the Chronicle. So, and some are more obscure, right? Like, your director of IT, that goes out and you're like, oh, that's usually a job that people are already in the community and will apply for. I don't know that I had anybody who would leave to go do that. So they're not equally attractive, I guess.
No, that's great. That's really helpful. Kirsten, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and all that you're willing to share this on this video interview. So thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me. It was an honor.